Perfect. Thanks, Alex, for the introduction. Evening, everyone. Good to see so many people on the call. I'm just watching the various names come in. Number of names I recognise on there. I see someone from West Hartlepool, my first adult club on there, and then yeah, number of names that we've spoken to over the last few months and years. So, my name is David Barnes. I'm head of discipline at the RFU. I've been in post now for just over 7 years. In that time, seen many different discipline issues on and off the field. I think it's fair to say that the discipline issues that we're all facing have changed significantly in the last few years, or over the last few years. The on-field cases are still there, but we're seeing a lot more misconduct issues or issues away from the field. Um, Thanks for everyone for putting their comments in, and I see a number of the sort of discipline team from the various CBs are in there as well. Um, if you get a chance, just it'd be good just to put in there what you'd like to get out of tonight, as in what would be a really good thing for you to go away with knowing tonight. I obviously can't change my presentation too much, but I can sort of try and adjust things and try and pick up on some of those themes that you want to cover. Before I start, I'll let Josh, who is also on this call, just introduce himself, and then I'll go from there.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's good to be here. My name is Josh Peter. I'm a discipline case officer for the RFU, and I've been doing this role for nearly 3 years now. Not quite had the variety of cases that David has, but it's quickly closing in. And yeah, it's good to see you all.
Perfect. Thanks, Josh. In terms of tonight, we're looking to go for what, about 45 minutes to an hour. And as I say, lots of questions. Happy for you to put questions in the different functions or in the chat, and we'll see what we can get through as well. In terms of what we're looking at, we split it into various areas. So we'll do it. Obviously, we're talking through things now. We'll do a bit of an overview on Regulation 19. So just a general high-level overview on what Regulation 19 is. Then we'll talk about the red card process. We'll then look at misconduct issues. So the issues that we're seeing, as I say, away from the field, as it were. And then following on from that, we'll look at club discipline process to finish with. And then just to say that we'll send these slides out, and then we'll also provide links in the version we send out that will cover many of the documents and files that we link to. We have a tendency in rugby to abbreviate things. If I do abbreviate something where I step into something that you don't recognize, just put it in the chat, and one of us, Josh or myself, will correct it. Just some of the common ones you might pick up: MOA, match official abuse, CB discipline sec or CB disc sec is the person at the CB for the discipline panel, and CBAGS is the age grade version of that. They're all pretty straightforward. I think most people will know them. But if I do slip into strange language, then just put it in the chat. I'm just reading some of the questions. Yeah, we'll pick up on courses and what's available, and as we go through the session. So just as a start, then, just Regulation 19. What is Regulation 19? What Regulation 19 is essentially it's the discipline rules for the RFU. Um, it is something that is taken from World Rugby. So World Rugby set the disciplines schedule for the whole game. So whether you're in New Zealand, whether you're in England or America, World Rugby insists there are a number of core principles that we must adopt, and we must have the same sanction table as every other union, and that table must be applied to all the adult games. So these are not just the RFU regulations. Whilst Regulation 19, which is the RFU version and comes from World Rugby 17, as I say, there are core principles there that we must follow, and the sanction tables as well. Now, the RFU itself, as in the core RFU, if you want to call it that, we delegate our responsibility out to the constituent body, to the CBs. So to your Gloucestershires, to your Durhams, to your North Midlands. So the discipline secretary who works in those CBs has my authority, or the head of discipline's authority, to act on our behalf. So where the regulations talk about the head of discipline having the power to do X or Y, that is often delegated to the people within the CBs. The next page, but what is important is that nothing is further delegated to the clubs. So um, clubs don't have the ability to decide sanctions, and I know that might be slightly confusing for some of the um, CBs that allow clubs to hear cases and then adopt it. But ultimately, the CB is the last line of authority, and they can accept a club decision, but the club alone cannot decide a sanction or cannot decide the outcome of a case. Um, but we all work together and we all use the same principles. In terms of, and again, apologies if the slides do get a little bit small. I'll talk through the key points. There are a number of things that are excluded from the CBs. So the RFU have to hear ourselves centrally some cases, and um, the first two relate to Premiership players, well, Premiership, Championship, National League players. All those cases must come direct to the RFU, and we don't allow a county board to hear those cases, simply because of the impact. And we look after the top four leagues in the country, as well as the Bucks Super Rugby. We don't allow counties to hear CBs to hear adult county match red cards. We have tried that in the past, and we've seen some slightly lenient outcomes. So, for fairness for the whole competition, we decided that we must hear everything ourselves. Um, Anti-doping or betting regulations will come to us, and safeguarding, which is pretty explanatory, self-explanatory. The RFU will normally or will often hear serious injury cases. Now, we can refer these back to the CBs, but at the same time, we will often hear a serious injury case. Um, a good question would be, what is a serious injury case? It is defined as essentially something that requires an admission to hospital. Now, the RFU will not hear every serious injury case, but it will have the option to hear it. And the reason we do that is our panels are sometimes well equipped to hear very complicated cases and then make that decision. The other aspect, and we're seeing a lot more of these in the game now, are cases under police investigation. I recognise a couple of clubs on the list this evening who have had some experience in this area. And any cases that are under investigation by the police must come to us. And a large part of that is we've got to be very careful not to prejudice the police case. And therefore, this often means a very long delay in hearing cases. And this can sometimes be 2 years plus, where the RFU can't hear a case and that player is often banned during that period. Whilst the police finish their investigation. But that's so that we can be fair to all parties and continue through. And then the final one is the RFU will hear all discrimination cases, so all verbal or physical abuse cases based on a protected characteristic. In terms of there's a couple of questions already going in. So what I'll do is I'll answer those at the end of this sort of section. Where do you find Regulation 19? So Regulation 19 is on the website. It's the new revamped website this year. It's all there, relatively easy to find. Hopefully, it's on the run section of the website. And you can search, it's got a good search function that will take you through to find the relevant area for you. We've redone the website, as I say, this year, and hopefully it's a lot more friendly. The wording has changed. It's a bit more clear, plain English. But there's some really good hyperlinks that you can see on that slide that are at the top of the regulation that will allow you to jump to key areas. So if you want to look at bad disciplinary record, for example, or you want to understand the rules of evidence, you can go straight to them now rather than paging through or leafing through the various pages. So that sits on the website. We'll obviously send the links out on that. Um, in terms of the key principles of Reg 19, um, the main one for us is that it follows the principles of natural justice. Our disciplinary panels are not courts of law, and certainly in many CBs, these are not legally qualified people. And the importance is to get the right result in relation to acts of foul play and technical defects or potential procedural issues could be second place to getting the right outcome for a rugby process. It has become more legal, and we are seeing the introduction of a lot more legal people involved, certainly at the higher levels. However, the principle still remains. And it's important as well, and I hopefully everyone would know this, but it's important that the standard of proof in all cases is the balance of probabilities. So it's not beyond reasonable doubt like the criminal system, it's the balance of probabilities. Is it more likely than not to have happened? And there's no sliding scale. So if we're talking a serious injury or we're talking no injury at all, it's exactly the same standard of proof in these cases. And then it's also it goes slightly, if I'm honest, it goes slightly against the first point about natural justice, but where the burden of proof sits, if the referee sends a player off, then it's for the player to show that the referee was wrong. However, in a citing or a misconduct case, it is for the person bringing the charge. So a citing, it's the club bringing the citing, or in a misconduct case, it's the discipline secretary to show that that act took place and the burden sits with them. But in terms of the red card, it is for the player to show the referee was wrong, as opposed to the panel have to show the referee is right. In terms of the jurisdiction of Regulation 19, and a couple of apologies, a couple of sort of technical points as we go through here. All regulations are binding over everyone who is a participant in the game. And the reason that's in there is people aren't able to say they didn't know about a regulation, and that's more related to misconduct issues than red cards. But that is in the regs. Also, and I have to say, most clubs are excellent at this, and most players, that where an investigation is undertaken by a discipline secretary in a CB or ourselves, anyone under our jurisdiction is required to cooperate with that and act in good faith. Yeah, not only do the things need to be supplied, but it has to be done in good faith. And whilst we can't compel people to tell the truth, we would expect people to support the process. And then from a club point of view, any person that is called before the CB or ourselves should have an RFU ID, something that most people will have now, but often a coach or a spectator may not have it. So that'd be for the club to assign. And it is still a requirement for clubs to hear cases where possible before the CB hear the case. Again, we're talking more about red cards here. And some CBs don't require it, but still a lot of CBs do require the club to hold the internal process, and then they can then consider that as part of their hearings. In terms of the panels themselves, as I mentioned, the CB panels are not sometimes not legally trained. However, they've all been accredited to sit by the RFU, which means they've been through a training process. They will understand Regulation 19, they'll understand the process, and they've been appointed to sit. Um, it can never be more than three people on the panel. And in some cases, it can be two or even one in some RFU cases. But typically, the panel will be three people only, and only they can hear a case. The discipline secretary, who will often be in a hearing, cannot be part of the panel. They should not be making any decision. They're there to support the panel themselves. Um, and in terms of the RFU panels, and I'll come on to the makeup of the panels in a second, um, these are completely independent of the RFU. So if ever you're in front of an RFU panel or any of your players or any of your members are, the panel that they will appear in front of have no connection to the RFU. Um, they are completely independent of us, and they're headed up by Richard Whittam KC, who appoints the panel. He chooses who he wants. The RFU can't choose, so I can't choose who these panels are. And the makeup at the moment is currently there are 84 people on there, 27 panel chairs, including some very senior legal officers, appeal court judges, high court judges, and then various other people who will sit on the wings of the panel, including ex-professional players, and people from all aspects of the game. We also have specialist discrimination panels that will sit on discrimination cases as well. Before I go into the next one, I'm just going to show a stat on the CBs, so the cases that are heard across the country. Anyone want to have a quick guess at which CB um, has the most cases pretty much every year? If anyone wants to type anything in. I've seen one for London. Anyone want to have a quick go? Probably should have asked this earlier before it all. North Mids. North Mids do like a case. I'll give that to North Mids. Okay, there's a few going in there. Essex. So the well done to those who said Yorkshire. So again, sorry, apologies, it is really small. So Yorkshire typically have close to 200 cases a year that they hear. They're always in the top, and typically Lancashire will be second in this graph. Essex, I have to say, Essex number is actually not the correct number, um, but you'll see that as a hearing group, that Yorkshire are hearing more than the RFU. And it's largely related to the amount of clubs and players that they have across. We saw a huge rise in Kent last year as Kent themselves took a decision to charge a number of misconduct cases, which increased their caseload. But you'll see the number of CBs over 100. Gloucestershire will regularly have over 100, North Mids, and are typically there, and Gloucestershire often as well. In terms of offences, um, Paul, I'll come to that question around panel convene. In terms of offences, the community game offences, the most common offence is still punch strike. It used to be about 40%, but that's now dropped considerably. It drops year on year, but we still have a lot of people punching each other or striking each other. In the lower end of the game, it's different in the top end with television. And then you'll look, two yellow cards tends to be extremely high. Dangerous tackle, as you wouldn't be surprised, is up there as third. 512 other is a high number, which is misconduct cases. I think what is very concerning, we'll talk about this a bit in a bit, is match official abuse is one of the biggest issues in the game. And if you just add the verbal abuse of a match official with misconduct, both of them obviously MOA, you're looking at close to 250 cases or over 250 cases, which would make it the second most common offence. And we'll touch on that. In terms of the combination of stats, so again, the CBs do a huge amount of work here. So 1,900 cases. As an RFU, we typically hear about 180 cases a year. It moves. We had 250 last year, but the CBs do far more work than us and see many more cases. Um, but in terms of the RFU itself, our makeup of cases is slightly different. As I say, due to television and other things, we don't see as many strikes. There's still 18 there, but we see more dangerous tackles, and they're picked up obviously by the citing officers as well as the TV. Just a final point on Regulation 19, um, the publication of outcomes. So the CBs, a lot of CBs now will publish their outcomes. The RFU publish every judgment. They're all available online in full. Um, and not just the outcomes of red card cases. Every case is up there in full on the RFU website. And some CBs will publish in full. Some CBs will publish redacted versions. But a lot of people now, for the transparency and to show the process, are publishing online. That's a very high level of Reg 19. In terms of, there's a question in the chat, and I see it's been answered, in terms of do panels need to hear cases in person? No, there's some CBs, so Berkshire would be one. Not very many at all of their cases are heard in person. A lot of it are dealt with on the papers. And that's not, so obviously it has to be accepted to be dealt with on the papers. But where possible, and I think more CBs are moving to it, dealing with cases on papers, as opposed to dragging people across, certainly the larger counties is a better option. Um, I I've seen a comment in the chat about concerns about giving evidence, and it's from a referee who felt like it was they were given a hard time, and we'll come on to match official abuse, but we certainly hope that the referee is treated appropriately in the hearings, and we are doing some work with the panels to ensure that and to make sure that a victim, as it were, in a case is treated appropriately. Um, Absolutely, a newsletter would be something we want to do, and I'd be interested to get some feedback on that as we go through. I'm just going to touch on the red card process, and it's slightly different. And the reason I want to go through it is, here's an example outcome, just to explain how we get to the outcome. I would think most people on the call will know this. But in this example, this person got 10-week entry point and they got 5 taken off. And then I don't know what they didn't get 5 added on, but an example, and we'll go through how we get there. So, in terms of the sanctioning process, there's various elements to it. The first is to consider the evidence. So the regulation, and I haven't put them all in there, is for the panel to decide which evidence they prefer. So what is the right outcome? So everyone will get, or anyone being charged has the opportunity to hear the evidence against them and to challenge that evidence. And where the case is not admitted, the panel must consider, as I say, which evidence they prefer. Did the case happen, or is the case proved on the balance of probabilities? You sometimes hear of something called the red card test. It's a subjective test. It's in a lot of cases there is no specific outcome for a red card test. It depends on the offence, and it depends what the panel believe. However, that's formed over time. So a tip tackle that lands on the head or neck is more likely to be past the red card test than one where the person's lifted above the horizontal but lands gently on their side. Having said that, the head contact process, and I've only got 2 slides on this, is more of an objective measure. And so World Rugby put this in place. This applies to every head contact at any level of the game. And it is a very structured way of deciding if the red card is met. It's still slightly subjective in that degree of danger is a little bit subjective, but this process applies, as I say, to every level. Just tonight in an RFU hearing, we felt it was a red card, but it's been found to be a yellow card. and it's an example of how this process has been used. Um, this is I won't go through the red card process in head contact process in full, but this is a good clip. Feel free to put in the chat if anyone thinks it's a red or a yellow. Um, uh, and I can give you the official World Rugby outcome. So World Rugby circulate these clips. Um, the process that needs to be followed is there head contact, yes or no? Is it foul play, yes or no? Degree of danger, and then any mitigation. So for those watching, is there head contact? Yes, there absolutely is. Is there foul play? Yes. The player who makes contact is upright and could have got lower. Um, is it a red card or a yellow card? They're all putting in. In terms of the reason I show it is just because of the structure and the flow, as opposed to a yes, a right or wrong outcome. Um, a few reds in there. Red, red. It's a really good clip because it does split. And the official World Rugby view, which might surprise some people, is that they found it a yellow card. And the reason they found it a yellow card was that the head contact, yes, foul play, yes, degree of danger. So they said there's a high degree of danger. So we're at red card at that stage. However, in World Rugby's view, the impact of the first tackler, number four, moved the ball carrier, which meant there was mitigation available. Um, again, I'm not so much putting this up for a debate in terms of whether it's red or yellow, but just to show you the process that is followed. Um, World Rugby circulate these every month, and we can always make these available to the clubs as well. Um, should that be helpful? Someone asked a question about match footage. So it's important to say that the panel can consider any match footage. So be that a VO, be that a proper camera, be that a parent on the field with an iPhone, that any footage can be considered by the panel when deciding if a red card event took place. Um, and I think it's important. We're seeing a lot more VO now, a lot more incidents. There is sometimes a misconception that if VO didn't get it, it doesn't count, and therefore the people can get off the red card. Um, if VO didn't get it, then it's on the referee's report. So the referee's report goes back to being the sole basis of fact, um, and then the panel will decide. Um, just that if there is a footage, or say there is a VO and a club didn't supply it, then a panel can decide that that footage would be damning for their player. It's not something we see anymore. Um, sorry, much anymore, but it is there. And yeah, there is a lot more VO around now, and it's a lot more available. In terms of the sanction table, it sits in Appendix 2 of Reg 19. It's mandatory at all levels. The entry points can't be amended, and it's simply low, mid, top. Um, apart from there are some elements where you have to have mandatory mid, so you can't choose low end, and that's things like head contacts. But from an RFU point of view, um, match official abuse of a young match official is a mandatory mid-range entry point, or discriminatory abuse based on a protected characteristic would also be at least a mid-range entry point. Um, in terms of how we get there, there's a number of factors to decide the entry point, and I won't go through them all in this in detail, but essentially what the panel are looking to find, was it in an intentional act or a reckless act, as in did they do it on purpose, or was it something they should have knew there was a risk, and what's the impact on the victim? By far, they're the biggest factors that are considered. Is the player injured, and what is the extent of the injury? And was it intentional? Was it reckless? Um, there are other factors like premeditation or vulnerability. But if a player's done something intentionally and they've caused an injury, you're looking, certainly mid, often top, and potentially above for a serious injury. Once you get your entry point, you can halve it, and there's only 6 factors that can be considered. And again, the panels will mostly consider three things there. They'll say, does the player accept the charge? Um, do they have a previous record? And then essentially, do they have remorse? So do they say sorry? If the player accepts that the act, they have a clear record and they said sorry, they're likely to get 50%. And that applies to every or can apply to any kind of issue, be it match official abuse, be it striking on the field. The player can get up to 50% should they meet all the criteria. Um, and then finally, they sanctions can be aggravated, so they can add some back on, but only for three reasons. If someone's got a very bad disciplinary record, there's a memo from the head of judiciary or the CB saying that they want to stop a certain offence, and that's currently in place for match official abuse and any off field, and that's essentially how you get to that simplified version. Um, I'm conscious of a bit of time and I'm talking far too much. So I'm going to skip through meaningful, but the second part of meaningful is so once the matches are decided, the panel have to decide what's meaningful. In short, the panel have to be satisfied the player would have played. So if a player gets sent off and gets 4 match ban, and then says I would have played in the first team, the second team, the third team, the vets, and an invitational side. The panel will look at previous fixtures and decide whether that player would have realistically played in those games before deciding if it's meaningful. And that burden sits with the player to show that, not for the panel to decide. And then in terms of sorry, this is back to meaningful. It must be a meaningful game. So it must be a game that is consistent with the laws of the game. It's at the right level, and it's not a behind closed doors game. So, a training match between two sides wouldn't count as a meaningful sanction. Um, in terms of the judgments, there are various templates available, and these are all available to clubs if you want to use them. We're getting a club version. There is a bit of a move now for CBs to essentially endorse club decisions. So clubs that have got a good process in place could be asked to decide or to run this process and determine their own sanction for a player. And then the CB could adopt it if it is the right sanction. And then finally, on that part of the adult section, appeals are available. There is the ability to appeal any CB case to go up to the RFU, and that can be heard by a panel. There's grounds for it, and if the grounds aren't met, it can be dismissed. But essentially, there is an appeal right. I'm going to touch on age grade very briefly. The age grade process is very similar to the adult, apart from it's the process is meant to be much simpler. It's often it is done by the club in most circumstances, not the CB. That's because that people in the club know the player best, and obviously these are children under the age of 18. We can't impose any financial penalties on age grade players. And but every sanction, even though the club hear it, the CB or the CB age grade discipline secretary has the right to review that sanction. An example there of the sanction table, it just to say it applies to every environment, school, club, college, and age grade players can discharge more than 1 match a week. Sometimes it can be up to 3. If they can show that they would play school, club, and school again. But there is a right of review, and the age grade cases do count towards the club disciplinary record. Just to make people aware, and this goes to the alternative sanction piece that someone's mentioned, in the age grade game, and we're looking for this in the adult game as well, we're not quite allowed to do this yet, but we have the ability to put education in place. So in the age grade game, the normal sanction is put in place. and then in this case, the player gets 50% mitigation. What the age grade panels can do is they can decide to have a match sanction, but suspend uh, up to 50% of the final sanction if the age grade player um, does an educational course or an alternative sanction. This is something we took from New Zealand. It's very successful in New Zealand, and it's to encourage players to change behaviour in the age grade game and not just to sanction them, to keep them involved and to keep them moving forward, to keep them with the club. So in this example, say the player was due to get an 8-match ban, they get 4 matches off because they've got no disciplinary record and they've said sorry, and um, 2 matches can be actual, and then 2 could be suspended pending them doing a refereeing course, for example, or a training drill. And the CBs themselves will decide what's appropriate. But that has been now rolled out. It's been very successful in the regions, and it's now rolled out to every CB. And that should be available to your age grade players through the CB. In terms of safeguarding guidance, yeah, the we have had that debate about whether you can play 2 or 3 games on the in a week, and some have, well, some are playing 3 matches, and yeah, there are various issues related to that. Um, um, Again, the age grade judgment is available online. I'm just going to pause briefly just to read a couple of the questions. So there's a question on there about the CB introducing restorative justice. So absolutely they can. We'd hope that it's meaningful to the player, and that it's something that the player will learn from and develop. So cleaning the changing rooms, whilst that might be an option, we would probably say that's not appropriate in some cases for suspending a ban. Um, we're getting on to age grade parents, so I can come on to that. Um, in terms of 512 cases, many of you would have heard what a 512. Just to say that a 512 is very wide ranging. It's essentially a reference to Rule 512, so it's any misconduct case, and it can cover absolutely anything. And the difference with a 512 case or a misconduct case is there's no sanction table. Any appropriate sanction can be given. And what we tend to see now is this is where we are seeing more education put in place, because the panels can choose to say, we'd like you to do, you're going to get a 4-match ban, but then you'll also be required to fulfill a certain education requirement as well. And that's fully possible under 512. Essentially, any appropriate sanction. So it still has to be proportionate, but it can be a fine. It can be any kind of sanction, and that will. So that's sorry, that's for any 512. And just an example of that is bad disciplinary record. And I just put this up as an example of what would be a 512. So a club that's deemed to have a bad disciplinary record, which in this case is they've been in front of a panel 8 or more times as a club, or they've had 5 or 1 offence, or they've had 3. The CB can decide what is appropriate, and that might be a warning. It might be a match sanction, a point sanction on the first team, but ultimately it'll be proportionate to what they do. In terms of who checks on restorative justice, it should be checked by the CB, and that's something that we are aware of that needs to be looked into in terms of reporting back, and we need to make that easy for all parties. I'm going to touch on match official abuse, and again, I'll move this. I'm conscious of time, so I'll move this reasonably quickly. Match official abuse is a huge issue in the game. We are seeing an increase in cases, and that's disrespect and abuse of match officials. We interviewed the officials over the 2 seasons. We didn't do it last year, but the results in the 2 seasons before that were almost identical. Over 50% of the officials have been abused. and we're at very serious levels here. And as a game, this is something we need to address. Um, if there is well, there are different levels of abuse, and I'm just going to touch on what they are. Um, Disrespect is the lowest level, if you want to call it that, of abuse, even though no level is acceptable. It used to be called dissent, and this is around questioning the match official. And there's some really, really good guidance on the website around what is disrespect, what is abuse, and what is match official abuse, and how we define it. But much lower sanction points than some of the other entry points, so 2, 4, 6. And this is where someone questions the decision, um, and or it could be non-verbal. And this is, as I say, the lower end. So, what a rubbish decision, or are you serious? Are you having a laugh? Um, that would be deemed disrespect. Um, the alternative to that is abuse. So abuse has a higher sanction of 6, 12, 18. Um, and that is where it's aimed at the official themselves. So uh, where the match official is abused, and it tends to be with a you in it. So you are this, or you are, and anything that questions their integrity, so cheat or anything like that would be deemed abuse. Um, Clearly, physical abuse is straightforward. Anyone who pushes a referee or strikes a referee will be dealt with very severely, hence the strong entry points. One thing that people might not be too familiar with is no person can approach a match official within 30 minutes of the end of the match or at half time. That's to give everyone a chance to cool down. We are seeing more charges brought for this, so it's important that people are aware of that. And then also the head of judiciary, we talked about aggravation earlier. Every match official abuse sanction is increased 2, 3, or 4 weeks, depending on entry point. Um, a really, really important one now, which I'll just slow down a little bit for, is the club's responsibility for club members. Um, there's a regulation that is almost identical to the FA regulations. Um, the A club shall be responsible for ensuring that all reasonable steps have been taken to ensure that players, coaches, members, spectators conduct themselves appropriately and do not behave in a way that is improper, offensive, abusive, threatening, indecent, or insulting, or enter the pitch without the authority of the referee. Um, all reasonable steps. Does anyone want to put in the chat what they believe reasonable steps would be to ensuring that members don't behave in such ways? And the reason I raise this is that as a club, if some of your spectators, for example, were to, I don't know, shout at the referee, abuse the referee, it may well be that the CB come to you and say, "We're thinking of charging you under this. We'd like to know what steps you took to prevent this taking place in the first place." So has anyone got any ideas about what steps a club could take to ensure um, while they're coming in, Paul, in terms of, um, I'm not quite sure what that means in terms of does the include coaches that ref at a young age? Happy for you to clarify that, and then we'll come back on that one. So a few things, absolutely regular communications, codes of conduct, guidance, notice and match programs. Respect barriers would be a key one, or some sort of perimeter to stop people coming on the field, for example. Um, if the club have done everything correctly, then and essentially there's nothing else that could have been done, then that's the only defense to the charge. I raise this because it is important for clubs to realise that you are responsible for everyone in your ground. And we had one recently where it was said that someone had come onto the ground, never been seen before, but watching the game now, they still came under the jurisdiction of that club, and that club were risking a sanction for their behaviour. So, and if a club was potentially to have not taken all the reasonable steps, the CB would be asking them to put that in place. and failure to do so would result in essentially a higher sanction should it happen again. So proactively, we're looking for clubs to address some of these issues and to work with you on helping do that. The other thing that we have seen is players entering the field. Sorry, not players, parents entering the field. We have a huge issue with this in the game, and I say a huge issue in that when it happens, it's very serious, and we must be very careful about, or we must do everything we can to stop this. So, as well as what reasonable steps, respect barriers, making sure people know the rules. Um, if anyone enters the field, and this is being used a lot more now, they can be immediately suspended for 4 matches, up to 4 matches, while the investigation takes place. In an age grade game where someone comes onto the field and touches a child, then it is likely, very likely, that they will be suspended immediately while the investigation takes place. We are This is a huge issue in the game in terms of something we need to deal with. And it is a strong sanction, but we know from experience, certainly this season, that it is having an impact and starting to deal with some of these points. Um, in terms of how that would play out, the suspension forms, there's set forms now that would be sent out asking for representations for people coming onto the field or notice of interim suspension. Within that document, there's frequently asked questions. So if we say, for example, it's a parent who comes onto the field and pushes a child, they would immediately be suspended. And one of the questions we'd be asked is, can we drop our child off at training and or at matches? And the FAQs will help answer those questions and make sure that everyone understands what can and can't be done. Essentially, they can't attend the match, but they can still drop their child off and make sure the child doesn't miss out as well. Um, that is on coming onto the field. Um, we do have the issue with common land, but if a rugby game's taking place and someone comes on, I'd be reasonably confident of upholding a charge that they've come onto the field without the authority of the referee, and they could be charged. If it's clearly no one connected with the club, then that would be dealt with. Um, I'm going to touch on discrimination complaints, and I'm running into the last few minutes here. Um, I'm going to skip through this, and apologies for that, but just to say that all discrimination cases come to the RFU now. We will pick these up uh, centrally. We're seeing roughly about 64% of cases relate to race at the moment, 18 to sexuality, and a number of other points. But the RFU will investigate those centrally and will often come to clubs to help us in that process. In relation to age grade, our approach is slightly different, and we're looking at the education first approach within the age grade game in a lot of cases. We are aware that hearings, especially in front of our panels, are extremely stressful for adults, not let alone children. And an education first approach for discrimination cases in the age grade game is often the most appropriate way forward. And we've got specific courses for that, and we're developing more and more courses to develop as we go along. And in terms of someone's asked, with female match officials, have we seen an increase in gender-based discrimination? We are seeing more gender-based discrimination across all aspects of the game, in terms of within clubs and with also on the field. As we go forward, it's important, and that's reported and then appropriately dealt with. I mentioned reasonable adjustments. This is more from a club perspective. We have some guidance from Irwin Mitchell that we'll publish and make available to the clubs, just to say that clubs have a legal obligation to make reasonable adjustment for any disabled person. If that person has made you aware, so often in the age grade game, we have people making us aware of ADHD or behavioral concerns. the club must make a reasonable adjustment for that person, and must look to work with them. And there are times when reasonable adjustments aren't possible, but it needs to be clearly set out why they're not possible. But again, the guidance should be sought on that, and everyone has an obligation to ensure that we are um, complying, or clubs and RFU are complying with the Equality Act 2010, and all reasonable steps are taken, adjustments. In terms of the club, and I've only got 3 minutes as my watch, 3 or 4 minutes left. So apologies, I've run slightly over. The club internal discipline process is something that I obviously wanted to go through. Um, in terms of club membership issues, so members within clubs, Regulation 19 doesn't apply. It's a really good basis to follow, and it follows really good principles. But if it is a dispute between two members of the club, essentially that will fall back to the club rules and constitution. So every club has its own rules, has its own constitution, and that will set the process for which an internal dispute should be dealt with. Um, I think that the key point we found is that many clubs don't have a defined process for misconduct. A lot of clubs have a red card process, and the rules will talk about dealing with red cards, but they don't have a misconduct process. And it's really important that that's put in place, and that will save the club time and everyone else time as they follow a structure to go through. It's really important you have an up-to-date code of conduct. People need to know the rules, people need to be aware of the rules, and you obviously can then say where people have not complied with the rules. So a code of conduct is important for a club. Um, and then a right of appeal. I put this in. Not all clubs have a right of appeal, and some don't feel it's necessary. But if you are a cask, for example, or you're a charity club, then the individual may well have the right of appeal to the charity commission. So even outside of the club, um, there is no right of appeal to the RFU for a club membership issue, and there's no right of appeal to the CB. They are separate. Whilst the CB may assist or may offer support on the panel, they're not obliged to hear an appeal. And I'd just make a point around subject access requests in that they are becoming more common, and anyone who is issued with a subject access request, even if it's on your Hotmail or own email, would need to comply with that should a member ask for it. And then there is a regulation in there that should someone bring a safeguarding concern or a discipline concern, they should not be subject to any detriment should they raise it with a club. So should they go to the club and say, I'm aware of this safeguarding issue, that person is essentially protected whistleblower in terms of making that, if it's in good faith. In terms of the process that should be followed, if you follow the principles of natural justice, it won't go far wrong. And that's giving notice to anyone subject to a club charge. They have the right to test any evidence against them. So if a statement's put in, they have the right to ask that person to attend and to question that evidence. Everyone should know what evidence before they get into the hearing. And in terms of, and then no person with a conflict can hear the case. So someone who investigates a matter cannot sit on a panel, or should not sit on a panel to decide a case, because obviously they've heard, or they've been looking into the case and they've heard various other aspects of it. The investigator should be different to the panel. And then there should be a decision at the end of it that should be reasoned and available. I would say that one of the big things to also do is to underpin any process with documentation, clearly setting out the reasons. A final slide is just the speak up policy. It's more that's available for people who want to raise any concerns, and that can be made available to the club. Anyone who comes into the Speak Up policy is treated confidentially. And then if we do get one in relation to a club issue, we will all come to the club on most cases if it's within scope. Um, but we will work with a club to identify it. Um, that is the end of the session. I have a number of questions there. Can witnesses remain anonymous? So if an anonymous statement goes in, the person subject to that statement has the right to test that evidence. If the evidence can't be tested, as in the person doesn't want to put their name to it, there could be very limited weight given to that evidence. So the panel could, if it can't be tested, the panel can decide that actually they can't really give it much credibility because it hasn't been able to be properly checked. So anonymous statements can strictly be admitted, but they should be panel should be very cautious about accepting them because the person subject to the charge should know what evidence is against them and the basis for the evidence against them and be able to challenge that appropriately. Um, Happy to take any questions, or I'm conscious it's also 8 o'clock. Um, I hope that's helpful for some people. We'll circulate the slides. We will. It will all be available on the webinar, and I thank you for taking the time. And hopefully, if you need to contact us, please drop us. Okay, there's a couple of other questions. Most effective ways of reducing supporter parent issues. Um, I think that I think the culture within the club is the most effective way of addressing some issues and communication. Where we've got a good coach who is setting the right example to the children on the side of the field, that tends to spread over into the parents, and is often a good role model for people to follow. I've seen the A boards up at clubs and various other messaging, and again, that's useful. Um, but it's about challenging behavior, and there's a really good RFU course, um, bystander training, that can be rolled out, and that is available for any club. If you want information on bystander training, drop us a note, and we can give you more information on that. And it is sometimes the parents or the spectators and coaches, players generally are pretty well behaved, that's why we need to deal with some of that. Paul, the bystander, if you drop me an email, we can get that organised for you. And it's a really good course delivered by the educators, RFU educators. Okay, well, I'm gonna switch off, but thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.